Hello,
Hey,
everyone. Welcome. Hey, Jason.
hey, Ksenia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to our Disaster Capitalism and COVID-19 webinar. We're really excited to host this, and we've got some amazing speakers today. Just short introductions before we get into this all excitement. I'm Ksenia Chmutina. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Architecture, Building and Civil Engineering at Loughborough University in the UK. And I'm also a co-host of Deconstructed Podcast. And I will be hosting this session today with Jason von Medding. Hey, Jason.
Hey,
Who is, of course, also, which side of the screen you're on, I don't know. Also the co-host of Deconstructed Podcast. Jason is also the associate professor at the Florida Institute of the Built Environment Resilience at the University of Florida. And you will hear from Jason in a minute. We're also joined today by six of our amazing comrades. So Claudia Gonzalez Muzio, Nitul Bahanvati, Thomas Paes, Victor Marchesini, Wes Cheek, and Dewald van Niekerk. And we cannot wait to introduce them to you shortly. So a couple of house rules, which I'm sure you're all aware of. You've done millions of webinars probably in the last 6 months, but nevertheless. So if you're watching us live, wherever you're watching us live, please post your questions and comments, and Jason and I will be monitoring the chat as our guests share and chat. And we will try to get through as many questions as we possibly can. We have left, hopefully, enough time for a nice conversation. But we will also follow up on social media if we run out of time. So you can also post your questions on Twitter. Just tag @DisastersDecon, so our podcast Twitter tag. And before hearing some stories of disaster capitalism from around the world, we just want to give you a very quick introduction to why we are running this webinar, why we're here today. So I'm sure you're all aware that disasters present opportunities for change. And for some of us, this is about changing for the better. But unfortunately, for many, it is about profiteering. It is changes for profit, resource extraction, and reinforcing the business as usual status quo. And so this latter profiteering change, or change for profiteering view, has in recent years become known as disaster capitalism. Disaster capitalism manifests through the interplay between the neoliberal policies and practices and disasters, and it is very prominent in public and private spaces alike. There is a lot of anecdotal evidence of disaster capitalism. Just think of profiteering that has been happening as a result of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. And a group of us wanted to collect more evidence from different parts of the world to investigate how state and non-state actors are using the pandemic to consolidate control, to financially profit, and also to protect systems of oppression. The media has largely picked up the stories of disaster capitalism and disaster profiteering in the US and also in European states. But our focus in this webinar will be on less widely understood examples, on the stories that we don't really hear in the news because very often they're simply not newsworthy. In the past few months, we have collected information from many different countries where disaster capitalism has manifested in very different ways during COVID-19 pandemic. And we will hear from members of our working group that bring particular expertise and insight into each place.
We were able to do this work thanks to Converge, a National Science Foundation funded initiative headquartered at the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder. Converge addresses social science, engineering, and interdisciplinary research and establishes and strengthens networks between disciplinary communities. Converge and the Social Science Extreme Events Research SEER network founded 90 COVID-19 working groups for public health and social science research. Our working group on disaster capitalism and COVID-19 was one of these working groups. Broadly speaking, the working groups were looking at pressing methodological, ethical, empirical, and societal concerns that have become even more apparent in times of COVID. So a little bit more about our working group before we get to our special guest today. This working group includes academics, practitioners, politicians, and journalists from around the world. All of us looking for examples of COVID capitalism to understand whether social and economic justice are being served or whether state and non-state actors were using the pandemic to consolidate control, to financially profit, and protect systems of oppression. Some of the questions that we aim to answer in this working group are: how do exposure and effects vary according to status, privilege, identity, and oppression, i.e. COVID-19 is not a leveler? Number two, which workers are essential, and how is the pandemic being used to provide corporate welfare? Three, how is the public organizing against COVID capitalism? And four, what alternatives are there to a return to normal? So we're still continuing this work with this amazing group of people, and we would love for more people to join us in some of the initiatives that we have going. So please let us know if you want to join the group. We welcome new members. Get in touch with Ksenia or me if you do wish to join. So let's begin. As Ksenia already said, we've got 6 guests today who will be sharing insights into disaster capitalism: Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Japan, and South Africa. Over to you, Ksenia.
All right, let's roll. This is really exciting. So our first guest today is Claudia Gonzalez Mucio. Hey, Claudia. Hey, welcome. So, very short introduction. Claudia is an architect based in Chile. She has specialized in territorial planning and urbanism, risk management, and cultural heritage. And in fact, we've met through cultural heritage and disaster risk management work. Claudia has also been a consultant for the World Bank and ICOMOS. And she's also a lecturer on territorial planning and natural hazards in graduate programs at universities in Santiago and Valparaiso. And as Claudia noticed, we had this conversation that very often, unfortunately, both of us are invited as talking women to different panels, but not today. So over to you, Claudia. We're really excited to have you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome to our group. I'll talk about disaster capitalism in Chile now, which, as you know, is very linked to the neoliberal model that has prevailed since the Pinochet dictatorship. And it's then maintained and intensified by all the governments that have followed, and which has resulted in a country where the richest 1% of the population concentrate 25% of the GDP, and on the other hand, 70% of the workers have an income of less than $700 per month. The COVID-19 arrived in Chile at the height of a social explosion and the discussion regarding the possibility of a new constitution. The pandemic only made more evident social, territorial, and economic inequalities that caused the discontent of the population. So we'll see a lot of examples of what we call disaster capitalism in response to COVID. And one of the main ones we will summarize as follows. The first one is the Employment Protection Act, aimed at allowing employees to maintain the relationship with their employer without receiving a salary. Employers must keep paying for the workers' health insurance and retirement funds, and the workers can collect the unemployment insurance to support themselves during the emergency while don't receive any wages. They had to withdraw the fund they accumulate themselves in private institutions for the times they don't have a salary. This law was aimed at small and medium-sized businesses at risk of bankruptcy due to economic instability, but it was used also by large corporations. These large companies, however, distributed part of the profits of 2019 among their shareholders at the same time they were using the law. Another example are food aid boxes. The government promoted the delivery of 2.5 million boxes to the 70% of the 40% of the most vulnerable houses. The purchase and distribution of the boxes was made through large companies instead of supporting the local commerce, repeating the formula that they used during the 2010 earthquake. The cost of assembling and delivering the boxes were higher than having the funds going directly to beneficiaries' accounts. And the same strategy was promoted by the CPC, the Confederation of Production and Trade, an organization that brings together the largest businesses in the country and which collected a fund of $100 million establishing donations to some nursing homes for the elderly, some NGOs, donating medical equipment to public hospitals, rapid tests for COVID, and also providing food boxes, all of these subject to tax reductions. An attempt was made to pass a law to suspend debts and payments for water, electricity, and gas bills during the emergency, but the government pointed out that this could be considered unconstitutional, and the companies providing these services, which are all provided by private companies, could be affected by the state action claiming for a compensation. This was just a sign about the serious economic difficulties that people are going through. In response to the economic crisis that has deepened by COVID, and as a consequence of the insufficiency of the economic aid packages offered by the government, the Congress passed a law allowing the voluntary withdrawal of the 10% of the retirement funds of most of the population of the country. These pension funds are managed by private cooperatives too, and all of the companies were, of course, refusing the measure. The average pension amount is so low that for people losing the 10% of almost nothing was considered minimum, but to can afford the emergency. Although it was believed that this measure would have a negative impact on the economy, at first the stock market have reacted negatively, but the injection of funds to people allowed the reactivation of trade, and at the same time allowed that people reduce the amount of their debt. The problem here is that it's not the state which is helping the people, but people are using their own savings. Probably as a result of the social upheaval and also the lack of adequate responses from the government, a series of actions to resist disaster capitalism have been observed. Most of them from part of the municipalities and local governments that, for example, pressured the government to suspend face-to-face classes in mid-March, and together with the scientific community have insisted on incorporating primary health services into the COVID strategy. And also from part of the local communities, where a lot of emergent groups that arose from the social unrest protests occurred in 2019 have promoted initiatives to help those in need, claiming if the state doesn't take care of us, we will take care of each other. That's it, Ksenia.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you for this really coherent introduction to what's happening in Chile. And I'm sure there will be lots of questions, so we will unpack it later on.
Okay. Next, I want to introduce Holmes Paez. We're going over to Colombia. Let me just, here we go. Hey, Holmes. How are you? Holmes currently works at the Department of Civil Engineering, Pontificia Universidad Javeriana, Bogota, Colombia. I'm sure I killed that. Holmes does research in disaster risk management and construction management and economics. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you about the situation in Colombia. Over to you.
Hello, everyone, again. Thank you for this invitation on this seminar. First, I would like to say that this case of Colombia is thanks to the collaboration with Gonzalo Lizarralde and Benjamin Erazo from the University of Montreal. Then, I would like to give you a short introduction about our case on disaster capitalism on COVID-19. So Colombia is a wonderful country, but at the same time is one of the unfortunate contrasts compared to the benefits of the capitalism model, and in this case on COVID-19. Colombia is an independent country since the 19th century. It has not had a dictatorship except on one occasion in the 50s. It is currently part of the OECD, and according to its constitution, is a rule of law with economic policy and a liberal trend and capitalism, without saying that is an extreme liberalism. In contrast, Colombia has a history of violence with guerrilla groups and drug traffic for more than 5 decades, with a considerable level of inequality and significant fragmentation in terms of social welfare at the country and city level. So it's a country of contrast. On the one hand, some people live in a very good economic, educational, and social condition. However, a huge part of the population live in condition of poverty and social vulnerability. That is why we could consider this country as an example of disaster capitalism, because it has not achieved a good condition for most of its population. What is the cause of all of this? On the cases of the disaster, I would say that a lot had been written. Many people, economics, sociologists, could attribute to the history of their institutions, others to the influence of the country-rich elites and the concentration of resources, others to the lack of industry and technological innovation, others to poor distribution of income, and finally, a problem in the distribution and management of the land. There may be many cases may not have a conclusions answered about disaster capitalism in Colombia. However, the social instability that we are experiencing to date, for example, since last year, there has been a permanent social protest that is an example that the situation in Colombia is bad. And it's interesting to think what is happening. With COVID-19, the situation, I think, has gotten worse. To date, we had around 14,000 deaths per 100,000 people. In other words, we are not the worst country, but we are not that good either. The consequences of the virus have been very bad in my country. We had extremely high unemployment in the country and many companies have gone bankrupt. The most worrying thing is that the people with the worst situation historically today will see their situation worsen. What we can help improve the country in recent years has been lost in a few months due to the mix between the problem of our system and the virus. It is very possible that developing countries such as Colombia will be the most affected by the virus in the medium term, and all of the discussion at the policy level that take place in the work about, for example, the poor performance of the economy, the concentration of money in few people, and the problems of globalization. The government and Colombian society have tried to mitigate this problem. However, there is a feeling that these efforts are insufficient and a lot of social innovation is required to be able to overcome the consequences we are experiencing. That's it, Jason. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Thomas, so much. We look forward to speaking to you some more later. Over to you, Ksenia.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Jason. That was great. So our next speaker, we're kind of moving gradually. We're now going to Brazil. And our next speaker is Victor Martuzini. Hi, Victor.
Hi, Ksenia. Hi, Jason.
Welcome. So Victor is a sociologist at the Brazilian Early Warning Center, Camadan. His research mainly lies in the realm of citizen science methodology and co-production of knowledge. So let's hear what's happening in Brazil. Over to you, Victor.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I don't know if we have Brazilians at the chat, so or if you want to do some questions. I decided to focus my talk on inequality, because inequality is one of the root causes of vulnerability. And when we check the data about land inequality in Brazil, we are very surprised. To have an idea about land inequality, 10% of the large properties in Brazil occupies 73% of the agricultural area in the country. So land inequality, I think, is one of the important dimensions to analyze the way that disaster capitalism is happening in Brazil. And these largest properties, they are producing commodities which have higher prices in international market, and such as soy, raw cotton, mining, ore. So we have many important commodities, and these commodities are especially in Brazilian Amazon. So now we are suffering a big dynamic pressure in Brazilian Amazon. This pressure is happening in environmental protected areas and indigenous lands. And these lands are prone to deforestation, fires, mining activities, cattle ranching, and land grabbing. So, I think many of you heard the talk of the Brazilian Minister of Environmental Issues. He said, let's use the opportunity of this pandemic to implement our project of reducing bureaucracy, dismantle all the environmental protection laws. Yesterday we had a report about that the minister of environmental issues, he had a budget for environmental protection, but he didn't use this budget. So there are many interesting process to analyze in Brazil, and it's interesting because almost 50 years ago, the sociologist Florestan Fernandes, he questioned if Brazil is a democracy or if Brazil is an autocracy, because there are a minor national elite that has economic power and political power. And interestingly, these national elites, they have the support of the armed forces to implement their projects. And many of these projects are related to the foreign corporation interests in Brazil. And this is happening now. So it's not clear the division of private and public sectors in Brazil. These are mixed. And one of the recent process that we are following in the government is that now recently there was a study showing that there were 3,000 military officers occupying key positions in the ministries of Brazil. Brazil has 23 ministries, right? And 11 are chiefed by retired army officers. So I think there are some, I don't know if I have more time, Ksenia, but we are feeling some changes in terms of data transparency. I think you have checked this about the case of COVID-19 in Brazil, that the Ministry of Health, they are hiding this data. So this is for today. If you have any questions, you can do it in the chat.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Victor. I think quite a few of us heard about Brazil in the news, but probably not to the extent that you've just unpacked now. So if you guys have any questions, please send them to us either via Twitter or on Facebook or in any other way that you're watching. Just post them. I'm sure you've all got loads of things you want to ask. Thank you, Victor. Over to you, Jason.
So next we are moving over to a speaker who is currently in Australia. Hi, Matil. You might be on mute, I think. Let's make sure.
Hi, Jason.
Yes, okay. Hi, Matil. So Matil Vahanvadi is a lecturer at RMIT University, Sustainability and Urban Planning in Melbourne, Australia. Her research focuses on the long-term impacts of housing reconstruction projects after disaster, the theory and practice of socio-ecological systems resilience, and community-led approaches. Matil will be sharing with us about the situation in India. So welcome, Matil. We really look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for the introduction, Jason. Hello, everyone. I would just like to ask you, what would you imagine when you think about India? For me, India is a colorful, diverse place which represents democracy, but certainly not equality. And today I'm going to present my views on what's happening in India. It is the second most populous country in the world, and now it stands second in terms of number of COVID cases, which is nearing 5 million. The economy has crumbled. 21 million people have applied for salary. They've lost their jobs, and they're asking for government help. And roughly 25% of them live under poverty line, which is not accurate figure. But it is not the grip of this that India or the Indian people need to be concerned about. It is the grips of the current government, which, like what you've heard from about Brazil and Chile, the government's main purpose is to steadfastly work towards consolidating their power and their Hindu nationalist ideology. So this government doesn't need COVID or any other disaster to see it as an opportunity to extend, expand, or grow their motives. They have been doing or proposing policies and suggesting narratives which have lied on the lines of social division and economic inequality. So the three main tactics that this government, Modi government, which is Bharatiya Janata Party, it translates as Indian People's Party. The three main tactics that this one person, the leader, has adopted is creating an image of himself as a daring leader, which is a one-person centric government, and he's the star hero of it. And he has given himself so much power that he has ability to propose any action without worrying about its consequences. His mantra is populism at any cost. The second is divide and rule, the footprints of which can be found in colonial history. And this we have seen more so during COVID, but even prior to that, with regards to what has been happening in Kashmir, which is forced inclusion of people to be part of India, or what has been happening at the border of Myanmar, where there is militarization and forced exclusion and discrimination against the poor and the Muslim majority. And the third is crony capitalism, to increase their power, this government has also teamed up with the local industrialists and billionaires. So now the whole machinery that runs India, which is the media, the people with money, and the politician, are all in the pockets of this government. And which is the scariest bit, that this government can actually do whatever they want to do. And there are quite a few examples that have emerged in the recent past as to how this government is inciting division. And this would actually bleed the very soul of India. And I wouldn't be able to recognize what India would be if the things he's promoting were to actualize. So there won't be much democracy or secularism, and it would just be a Hindu nation. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Mitul. That's so interesting to hear from you about India. And I think one of the things that's emerging across the stories that we've heard so far is just the strong importance of power in this, and how we discuss power relations and the role of the state and democracy in each of these places. So thank you so much. We look forward to coming back to you later for the discussion.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mitul. We're staying in that region. And yeah, thanks, Mitul, for staying up. It's midnight now, I guess, right, in Australia. We're now moving to Wes Cheek, who is also staying up. It's almost midnight in Japan. Hey, Wes.
Hello, it is almost midnight in Japan. Well, thank you guys for inviting me.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me just introduce you very briefly. I know sure. you're just so keen to share.
Let me stop my stopwatch. Go ahead. Introduce me.
Very keen to listen. So, Wes Cheek is a Japan Society for the Promotion of Science postdoctoral fellow at Ritsumeikan University's Institute of Disaster Mitigation for Urban Cultural Heritage in Kyoto. Wes has been conducting research in the Tohoku area of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami since March 2011. And in one of the recent events, Wes was accidentally introduced as a disaster socialist. And I think that this is the most perfect introduction to explain who Wes is and what it is he does. So over to you, Wes.
Yeah, it was a mistake, but it was a very happy accident. It was a great mistake. Well, thank you guys for inviting me. It's great to be here with everybody. And good evening, morning, and afternoon. I hope you're staying safe. Well, if you're in America, I hope you're staying safe from either the fires out west or the hurricane down south, especially in my hometown of Destin, Florida, where it's approaching today. And I hope you're staying safe from the pandemic everywhere. So in regards to disaster capitalism in Japan, it can be hard for us to see sometimes if we look with the same lens that we use to examine it in America or maybe other Western settings. For example, I lived in New Orleans for the last almost decade, and there's so many things that really fit our definite, like textbook example of disaster capitalism. You can look around every day and see it. There's some of that probably in Japan, but it's harder to identify in some ways, I think. It's more obscured. But I think if you look back to the original definition in Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine for disaster capitalism, is at its core using a moment of crisis to implement or entrench neoliberal reforms. And I think we can certainly find those examples across Japan. So at the onset of COVID-19, or I tend to say coronavirus, because that's what people say here, or coronavirus, so widely referred to in Japan, there was a lot of what I would call disaster commercialism. So Uniqlo and other big brands started to make masks, pretty good masks too, and sell them. Lots of stores began to sell masks and alcohol wipes and things like that. And several well-connected politicians got busted for hoarding masks that they had connections to get, and then trying to sell them at exorbitant prices. They were busted for that and had to give them back to people who needed them. But that's not really disaster capitalism, right? That's something that's kind of different that happens in all disasters. In a lot of ways, it's just providing a need. But if we're looking at Japan from a larger perspective of disaster capitalism, we can look at Japan going through this series of transitions from the developmental state, as Chalmers Johnson called it, where countries like Taiwan and South Korea, where the state leads the manufacturing and planning, but it's still a capitalist economy. And look at that transition to the neoliberal state under the Nakasone administration in the early 80s, the Koizumi administration in the early 2000s, and the Shinzo Abe administration, which just ended today, which has been the longest serving prime minister in Japan from 2012 to 2020. This is his second time serving. So Prime Minister Abe's big push was for what he termed Abenomics, which was definitely neoliberal reforms for Japan, right? So this kind of Abenomics is where I think we need to look at focus on disaster capitalism in Japan. And we can debate, there's also debate about whether Japan really made that neoliberal turn or not. But for our discussion today, we can just go ahead and take that as our supposition. So Abenomics had with it these three arrows, they were called, monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reforms. And one of what's cited as the main success stories of Abenomics is the promotion of tourism. Especially from overseas tourism into Japan. It created a huge economic bubble of tourism. So Japan has had a massive influx of tourists for the past decade. It's been hailed as a success, but it has been contested as a success too. It brings about with it all the issues running tourist economies do, being exploitative. And at the same time, Abenomics set out austerity policies and regressive consumption tax, right, that heavily burdens younger people who don't have the stable lifelong employment opportunities that their parents enjoyed. And this consumption tax was made and implemented under the reasoning that everyone needed to chip in after the 3/11 triple disaster, the tsunami in Tohoku, right? So of course, when coronavirus came, when COVID-19 set in, international tourism collapsed. And domestic tourism has dropped by 80%, I believe. It also meant that one of the big goals of the Abe administration, the Tokyo Olympics, the 2020 Olympics, had to be canceled. And these Olympics were marketed for Tokyo and promoted as a comeback story from 3/11, from the tsunami in the Tohoku region, even though in my field work, everyone I've talked to said, I don't know what the Olympics have to do with us. I don't know if they have anything to do with us. I don't know why they're saying it has to do with us. I'm not interested in watching them even. Now the rescheduling of the Olympics to 2021 is being sold as we have to have them. It's a comeback from coronavirus. It's a comeback from COVID-19. So first it was we're coming back from Tohoku, from the tsunami. Now we're coming back from COVID-19. It's a kind of mind-numbing boosterism that's endemic to disaster capitalism, right? The disaster event becomes the grounding motivation to carry on with misguided economic policies and endeavors that you were settled on doing anyway. And I don't think I need to lecture most of you about what is problematic about hosting an Olympics and all of the neoliberalism, the problems of neoliberalism wrapped up in hosting the Olympics and bidding for the Olympics. So in the middle of this pandemic, to try to keep tourism afloat, to keep the economy going, the Abe administration proposed a program, unfortunately named Go to Travel, ! Go to Travel, which used public funding, a large amount of public funding, to try to boost domestic tourism. So if you could buy packages to go places and stay at hotels, and the government would reimburse part of that to the hotel. They could offer discounted prices. This was being done during the middle of a pandemic when people are also being told not to travel between prefectures. So lots of confusion there, but there was a lot of preference saying we have to keep the economy running. And I think, as many of us have said today, we talk about the economy, not a specific iteration of a kind of economy that we've chosen to have, right? So this kind of economic boosterism running opposite to that. So interestingly, just a few hours ago, the Abe administration has ended. His new successor has come in, Suga, who is going to continue a lot of these same policies. And it'll be interesting to see how disaster capitalism looks going forwards, when I think we're really going to see the effects of this years down the line. One being the what happens to the real estate market in cities like Tokyo when large companies realize that they don't have to own loads and loads of office space in the most important, most expensive real estate market in the world. And you'll see this across Japan, and also problems with the universal healthcare in Japan, but still privately run hospitals that aren't getting an influx of customers for elective surgeries and other illnesses. So that's what I think we can look for in the future. Thank you very much, Ksenia and Jason, and back over to you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wes. Yeah, there are already questions coming up, so be ready, all of you, to answer lots of questions. And if you have more questions, do please post them. We will pass them to our participants.
Yeah, so whatever platform that you are on, you can just type them into the comments and they come up into our stream. And we will be coming to those questions shortly. But we have one more speaker that we want to go to. And we're going to South Africa now. Okay, here we go. So we're heading to South Africa to talk to Dewald van Niekerk. Hey, Dewald.
Hi, Jason. Hi, Ksenia.
Thanks for joining us. Dewald is a professor in geography and the head of the African Center for Disaster Studies at Northwest University in South Africa. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of the only journal for disaster risk sciences in Africa, JAMBA, the Journal of Disaster Risk Studies. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dewald. What's been going on in South Africa?
Dare you ask, Jason? Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'll try and keep this brief. Similar to what Victor has been asking, I want to ask everyone the question, what do you think of if you hear the word South Africa? What's the first thing that comes to mind? And keep that in the back of your mind as I go on. I think most people would probably think of South Africa in terms of Nelson Mandela or of our abundant wildlife, our beautiful scenery that we have in South Africa. But many people also obviously stop and think about our history. And this is where I want to pick up this brief discussion. And that is that South Africa has somehow become synonymous with equality. That being entrenched through a very unequal and unjust system that we're all aware of, which created a dual economy that we still sit with today. Now, everything after 1994, our democratic elections, didn't turn into a rose garden, unfortunately. Currently, there's around about 90% of all South Africans are worse off now than they were under apartheid. Yet we have more millionaires walking around on the streets. So just as a bit of a background, keep that in the back of your mind when we talk about our COVID response. Now, in South Africa, our first response came on the 5th of March when we had our first case. We actually had it, we knew about it by the 3rd of March. By the 15th of March, we instituted a national state of disaster, which means the government is giving extraordinary measures towards specifically disaster risk reduction. Now, our definition of a disaster is quite unique in the sense that it allows for the declaration of a national state of disaster for preventative measures. And this is what they did. The irony of it is that the power is given to the minister, a specific minister. And in the case of South Africa, the minister that it's been given this power is also the minister that stood against our current president in the elections of the ANC going into the previous elections. So it's not a match made in heaven by any means. That being said, on the 23rd of March, we went into a lockdown with a risk-adjusted strategy that was put into place. So currently, South Africa is still in this lockdown phase. And in terms of the disaster capitalism component and the focus thereof, I must say, in South Africa, initially there were very wide support of what the government has done and what they were doing. There were immense buy-in from the private sector, from civil society organizations, from churches, etc. And the initial few weeks, I think the general populace felt that the government is doing the right thing. However, questions about transparency started to creep in, especially when it came to the new COVID structures that was established by government. Now, the interventions that the government put forth, I would say basically happening in 3 phases. The first phase was a kind of immediate tax relief phase where the tax relief was given to individuals and companies. There was an unemployment fund, wage support that was given to people that to stay at home that couldn't work. Obviously, the mobilizing of disaster relief funds. Emergency procurement procedures came into effect, which I'll come back to in a second. And a lot of funding of small and micro businesses. Now, this sounds absolutely marvelous because we're looking after the small guy on the grassroots level. The second phase were focused towards, I think, stabilizing the economy a bit more. And there, the president managed to put forth this social and economic support package of in the region of about 500 billion rands, which is about odd $30 billion, which they got from somewhere. And the focus there was to support the health sector in PPE equipment. They also focused on hunger relief, for social distress and protection. And all of this went into the previous funds that I mentioned, or was supposed to go. And the third phase, which is, I think, the one that we're probably going into in it now, taking this forward, is one of more economic recovery, infrastructure programs, implementation of certain economic reforms, etc. Now, this sounds absolutely wonderful, I think. However, I want to talk about something that I would call disaster kleptocracy, and that is that the current government, coming from a history in the past 10 years of basically stealing everything that they can put their hands on that looks like public funding, has just gone on. And the COVID-19 procurement procedure, emergency procurement procedure, have just highlighted again how rotten the system currently is. And it's very similar to the situation in India and Brazil. The only problem that we sit with here is that it is a specific party that's in government that are basically fractured into different factions, and they are competing against what is basically public fund. These are highly connected political families or politicians that has rooted money that's supposed to go towards a COVID response towards their family. So extreme cronyism, nepotism that we see happening. What we also see is through this our neoliberal system, very easy for companies to all of a sudden now come forth, and now you have new companies or existing companies that now specializes in stuff like, let's say, PPE. However, we have smaller, previously disadvantaged companies that's actually their core business, that's totally cut out of the whole process of benefiting from the COVID response and the spending of these funds. So immense tender fraud that we are talking about. However, our Public Financial Management Act and Municipal Financial Management Act makes fairly good provision for tender procedures. But in the past couple of years, people have become experts in how to come around the requirements of these legislation, and they are just blatantly being abused. So what the government has now done, specifically our current president, is mobilized a special investigation unit. They have already made some arrests. No specific prosecution of any politicians that we've seen so far, and there seems to be a clamping down. Now, what this will mean for the future, obviously, the economic impact with so many developing countries is huge for South Africa. We're looking at low growth. We had around about 30% unemployment rate last year. Coming into 2020, this has gone up to about 45, I think up to 50%, and all the knock-on effects associated with that. So in terms of the South African situation, it's very much rooted within this disaster kleptocracy that has developed. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks so much, Dewald, for being with us, and we look forward to hearing more from you in a little bit. Welcome back, Ksenia.
Hello again. Hello again. Thank you, everyone. This was fantastic. I do hope you guys all out there enjoyed this as much as we have. We've got some questions coming up. Do keep them coming up. Jason is monitoring vehemently our chats on all the platforms. Jason has proven his multitasking skills today.
Yep.
Right. So, but we will start asking some questions. So shall we bring all the panelists back? And I will use my privileges of the host to kick off the questions.
Right.
Yay. Hi, everyone.
Hey,
thank you again.
Here.
Thank you so much. Almost great. Yes, we've got everyone. Fantastic. Right. Okay. Well, let's start. We've got quite a lot of time for questions and answers, so hopefully, we'll get good discussion going. And I want to start with a question to all of you, and we'll just take turns. So, as we said in the very beginning, US and UK and Europe really has been covered quite well in the news in terms of disaster capitalism. But what happens in your respective countries? So have these stories that you've managed to dig out been covered widely in the national media? And have you seen these same stories covered in international media? Or have you really had to dig for them? I'll start in the same order as we presented. Claudia, do you want to go first? I think we may have lost Claudia for a second, so we'll just leave her a little bit. And Holmes,
yes, thank you, Ksenia. Yeah, in my country, in Colombia, there's a contrast between in the daily media. For example, there's two main political parties in our country, so all the news are consuming or full of these two contrast ideas about disaster capitalism. In the right side of the political side, we have a good positive idea about the disaster capitalism. On the other hand, on the left, we have completely different ideology about disaster capitalism. So in Colombia, we live in a contrast all days about that kind of thing.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I can if you want.
Go ahead.
Internationally, you tend to get the same reporting on Japan for everything, which is Japan's a nation of people who follow the rules and orderly and all of that stuff. And then national media here tends to echo that, even though it's not really the case at all. But a lot of the political parties here have their own outlets. So, for example, the Japanese Communist Party, the JCP, who are very active and politically viable party, they have their own newspaper, the Red Flag, Akahata, that kind of pushes on this about the consumption tax, that maybe that's something that should be looked at as being repealed to help out with a disaster rather than subsidizing travel packages, that cutting the consumption tax could do something. So you got to kind of look for other outlets that are voicing displeasure. Mainly the parties that are out of power tend to, through their outlets, cover this stuff.
Okay, I want to come to a question that came through from Giuseppe on YouTube, I think. Giuseppe says, thanks to Mittal for her talk. How is Modi using COVID-19 to foster anti-Muslim propaganda in India?
Thanks for the question, Giuseppe. At many fronts, Modi is using to propagate anti-Muslim agenda. After COVID, in the very early stages, Modi promoted that 30% of COVID cases spread was due to gathering of Muslims in New Delhi for a conference. Now, none of these people had legally broken any rules, so they had followed what regulations or lockdown was in place at that time. But this increased the stigma so much in the society that many Muslims were rejected entry in the hospital. Some were frightened to go and get tested, and others just avoided going to the hospital. So that is one front. And just a few days ago, Modi laid foundation stone at Babri Masjid, a location which has been a point of conflict and has led to many riots between Hindus and Muslims in India. he laid stone to build a temple at a location where a mosque used to stand and was destroyed by Hindus. So he has seen this opportunity to just speed up all the things that he can do, which undermines and mutes the voices of the Muslims. And the thing he has done in Assam near Myanmar border is he has got military there and introduced acts which are one has to register and provide evidence to say that they are citizens of India. If they cannot provide that evidence, they have to leave India. So these are some of the people who are not educated, they're poor, they do not have documents with birth rights and birth name. And so there are about 20 million people who do not have their name on register. So they've completely undermined the nationality of Muslims. There are many details in that law and how they have changed it from 1990s to now to get rid of Muslims from India. So, and there's something completely different happening in Kashmir, but that all had happened prior to COVID. But what the government communication access to Kashmiris even during COVID time. So people are not able to have access to phone or internet even during COVID times, which is really harsh.
Thanks, Mutul. I want to go to DeWald with this next question from Justin Sharp. DeWald, you're editor-in-chief of a disaster journal. So Justin asks, is disaster capitalism another phrase for resilience, often used in DRR terminology?
Oh goodness, I certainly hope not. That's certainly not the way I understand it. I mean, resilience, similar to sustainable development, has kind of become a very catch-all phrase these days. And I think we need to understand resilience within the complex systems in which it functions. I won't say that it's a synonym for disaster capitalism at all. I think it's the focus must be to understand how various systems interact, and what are the characteristics of these systems that lead people to become more resilient, and that the resilient is not necessarily just within a capitalist system or neoliberal system. The whole idea of resilience is to build those capacities everywhere. So I think my short answer would be no, I don't think it's similar, but we must realize that in order to become resilient, it functions within systems, and one of those systems being a very much neoliberal system.
Thanks, Dewald.
Thanks, Dewald. We've got another question from Darian. This is to all of you again. So what we've been seeing in the US now is the intersection of different natural hazards, so hurricanes and also the wildfire with COVID-19. But we haven't heard much about the intersection of COVID and different hazards in other countries. So do you have any insight on what's happening and what has been happening and how this intersection has been shaping in the countries where you are, and what have you seen? Let Victor start. I'm just going to pick up on people.
Okay. We have seen this intersection of hazards and mainly disasters sometimes, especially now in Brazilian Amazon. So we have not only deforestation, but fires, right? And this is happening during the pandemic. So we have the problem of smoke, right? That sometimes even burnings in fires in Peru or Bolivia or Acre State, close to this region, due to the smoke travel and cause effects in other areas. So I think this is one of the main situations. and especially in other area of Brazil now is burning. It's called a Pantanal. That it's I think it's a natural heritage site. I think so. There are several examples. And some months ago, we also have in Santa Catarina state in the south of Brazil a tropical storm. I don't know if it's classified as a cyclone of a hurricane, but happens in the pandemic. So there is a study that shows that after the tropical storms, the number of cases of COVID-19 increased. And yes, and we have other situations in northeast of Brazil that are prone to droughts and desertification. That the problem is the lack of water. So there are many examples of this. And just to finish, and one problem is that about disaster risk governance is that in Brazil, the Ministry of Health is managing the pandemic situation, but for other disasters is the National Civil Defense. So these two ministries have had some problems with
I guess that's where the power and responsibilities come to play, or don't come to play, and unfortunately we see that unfolding a lot. Wes, what's happening in Japan? Because I've seen there's been typhoon recently, right, and quite a lot of flooding a couple of months ago.
Yeah, moreover than a typhoon, we had what happened last year, where there's just heavy rain, kind of after the season. We have a rainy season, a little bit after that, just very heavy rains. And in Kumamoto, in Kyushu, the island of Kyushu, there's a lot of rain that flooded these kind of mountain villages and larger towns. It was really bad flooding. A lot of people were killed, including in a senior center. And one of the biggest issues out of it was they had kind of a sheltering plan where people generally go to school gymnasiums or local facilities. That was a problem, but not the biggest problem. One of the biggest problems was they weren't able to have volunteers from outside the prefecture come in. They had to tell people specifically, please don't volunteer from another prefecture. When, if you ever had problems with flooding, you need a lot of volunteers to come. There's just mud everywhere to come clean this mud out. And people weren't able to do that. And I put that in opposition to what I was saying about the government also creating a $17 billion go to travel plan to have people, to pay people to go to hotels and restaurants and things and fly. But yet the emergency administrators in these local areas where they had heavy flooding had to tell volunteers, please stay away. So you have these kind of tensions happening within the whole situation.
Right. Thanks, Wes. Yeah, it's really interesting how kind of narratives contradict each other very often. Claudia, what about Chile?
We have the same problem that Victor mentioned in Brazil, because the Ministry of Health is managing the pandemics, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs manage all of the other kind of disasters. But one thing we have seen during this month is, for example, the lack of water and droughts, that it's been severe for the last 10 years, I say, and it's putting on risk the survival of many people. And water is what you need to manage the COVID-19. So it's been a very big problem. And the other things is that, of course, we have a lot of earthquakes. We have had a couple of earthquakes maybe last month. But there have been no severe enough, I think, that to pose many problems to the people that manage normally disasters. We'll see that probably the fires will be a problem during the summer, so we are preparing for that, I think.
Thanks, Claudia.
Claudia, while I have you here, there's a question that came in specifically for you, just asking if you could explain briefly the link between disaster capitalism and the social security system in Chile.
Yes. What happened there is social security system is run by private companies. there are banks and investment funds that run and trade the savings from the people in the stock market. It's like the richest families in the countries have made part of the fortune or most of the fortune by managing the savings from the workers. So, of course, they are not willing to transfer the public the security system to a public or a more solidarity system because they will lose some of the profit that they have gained in more than 40 years because the system is running from the 80s. This is the main relationship between the disaster capitalism and the social security system. It was imposed during the Pinochet dictatorship and it was created to create wealth. The problem is that wealth is for very few and the result of the pensions are still very low. Like 70% of the pensions are less than the minimum wage. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Claudia. Thanks for clarifying that and explaining what's going on there. I want to come to this question from a user on Facebook that asks, in the era of cascading disasters, are we really prepared or are we pretending to be prepared? Anyone want to take that on?
I can take that, Jason. I'll combine the last question as well. India has seen massive floods this year all along the west coast due to southwesterly monsoon winds, and also in the area which sits at the very foothills of Himalayas, which is adjacent to Bangladesh. It is completely flooded up to neck height and has caused massive devastation. People literally had to forget about COVID. There was just no other way. So yes, we are seeing a cascading effect, but as long as the political motives are intertwined with either religious ideologies, which is the case in India, inequalities will continue to persist. And that is the very foundation. We have heard from all presenters that inequality is causing major problem that is at the very root of all these challenges. So unless that is addressed, nothing else can be addressed.
Thanks, Mintu.
Yeah, difficult question. And we keep receiving difficult questions, which are really exciting. So we've got a question from Rima on Twitter, who says that it seems blurry on the divide of what makes an umbrella of disaster capitalism and what simply is a failure of proper governance. So Dewald, could you maybe elaborate on the difference between, poor governance and disaster capitalism?
I hope I understood the question correctly. Well, poor governance is exactly just that. It's incompetence by it's a government system not be able to deliver let's say in a democracy, the promises that they've made to the populace. Unfortunately, they are becoming synonyms in countries like South Africa, in the sense that there's such a focus on stealing from the state coffers that the focus on what is the value of the people have long been forgotten. And I think we in South Africa are in an extremely volatile and a sad situation. If you look at our reconstruction and development plans we had coming into 1994 and where we sit today, and with all the resources that we have as a country, it's a crying shame that we are where we are. For the life of me, I can't fathom that you will still see informal settlements in South Africa 25 years into a democracy. Given the amount of resources given to government and that's available within the tax base, and all of that is being eroded. So it's, on the one hand, it is absolutely two different things, but these things tend to converge. And similar with the previous, as Amit talked about the convergence of the disasters, we see this in governance as well, that all of these aspects converge, and I'm being very cynical and negative about it, but it is 5 o'clock in the afternoon in South Africa. But it seems like all of these things are converging into one boiling pot of where people are just the very thin layer of elites are just reaping the rewards of the economic system. Yet if you consider where the people of South Africa came from, it's actually, it's a total shame that this has actually happened and that we find ourselves in this situation. I'm sure I didn't answer the question, but that was my rant for this afternoon.
Thank you, Dewald. We love your rant.
Thanks, Dewald. I want to shift over to a question from Kirsten. And she asks on YouTube, since political aspects are playing an immense role when tackling an unprecedented threat like COVID-19, would you say that a disaster becomes political right from the beginning? And I think this is something a lot of people on this call will have something to say about. So maybe I'll go to Holmes, first of all.
Sure. There are in my country many politicians that make that kind of thing of to provoke some political discussion around the COVID-19. So completely right. It's completely understandable that in my country there are so different positions about the management of this COVID-19. For example, in the capital city, Bogota, and in other level in the national government, there are political fight against over the COVID-19. For instance, the mayor of the Bogota city explained that more liberals ideological form to manage the COVID-19 in the countries, in the government, in the national governments manage this kind of thing in other ways. So there are so many players in these games.
Thanks, Holmes. I think it's interesting because it's you often get people that accuse you of being so political with your research, and I think it's something we constantly have to reinforce is that disasters are political, right? So anyone else want to comment on that?
Yes, and if I can just maybe come in, if you go back to 76 with the article that Ben Wisner and Kenneth Westcott and Phil O'Keefe wrote, taking the naturalists out of natural disasters, that is it. We're still there. We're still in 1976. Nothing has changed much. And where you have to do with power and the spending of public funds and making those decisions, the one person over other, you're dealing with politics. So I absolutely agree with Kristen. This is where you have any type of disaster situation, the first thing that comes into play is the politics.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dewald.
I'll just make one more point, Jason. Is that okay?
Go ahead, Matil.
As someone who is not from disaster studies once asked me, so who manages emergency management when there's a disaster? And what happens when there's a pandemic? Is there a difference? So I said, yes, there is a difference. During emergencies due to, say, earthquake or floods, there's a whole emergency management department which is set up, and they manage the situation. And the money from national government coffers moves out to state, and so forth. But when there is a pandemic like COVID, the government also needs to work side by side with the healthcare professionals. And something that has been exposed in India and probably in a lot of developing countries is that their government-owned healthcare were just so ill-equipped to deal with this situation. And they should have been updated and money should have been invested in it for a very long time, but hasn't. So they need to play catch up. But yes, government has to play a major role in even building that relationship with the healthcare professionals.
Thanks, Mintu. I might come to Wes with this question from Isabella. She says, she asks, do you think that disaster capitalism is a global historical process, or a new economic social configuration that catastrophe contributes to highlight?
Do I have to make a decision on that? That's a big question. I don't think I can answer that. Is it or is it not? Yes. And of course, it's Isabella. So it's just very, very good theoretical question. I don't know. I don't know. Is it new? I would say that having these we just talked about politics and disasters, and every disaster is political, and the beginning through how we form risk, the social formation of risk is political. All these things are political. So is it new in that sense? No. But is the way we see it working now new because we have different kind of economic systems or ways we do things? Yeah, and I think disaster capitalism, we're putting an emphasis on neoliberalism, right? Because we're seeing these ways that it acts as a function of neoliberalism. But if you reconstructed the entire political economy and it was something different, we would see disasters under that lens. So it's always going to be changing with the power structure of the times, right? Which is why we advocate for having a more equal power structure. But I think it's always going to be new and always not new. Like the disaster is always going to be tangled up in power structures and tangled up in politics. So it's going to reflect the current arrangement there. Does it make sense at all?
It does make sense. Thanks, Wes. I want to come to you, Claudia. We have a question from Mirsin over on YouTube who says, what can be said about the abuse of power through implementation and establishment of legislature that isn't built on existing disaster management acts and policies?
I was muted. In the case of the pandemic, I think the governance that we have for disasters didn't work. It hasn't been used or implemented. They have tried to create something new without any proper governance based on the Ministry of Health, but run by the necessity of the need of keeping the economy functioning. The problem is that it was made evident that a lot of informality was going on in the working system here in Chile. So they had to manage how to protect people and protect the economy. And they decided in many ways to protect the economy instead of protecting people. But as you said, and you have mentioned before, everything is political. And we have seen that most of the decisions have been taken considering politics and economics instead of the welfare of the population. In the case of disaster management, we try to reduce vulnerabilities and reduce inequalities that cause or increase risk. And we have seen that this pandemic have increased risk a lot from the previous situation.
Thanks, Claudia.
Can I compliment?
Victor. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, I think the Wald mentioned the state of public calamity at national level. We also had this in Brazil. I think it follows what Giorgio Agamben said about the state of exception. And during this, the law is suspended, and the president or they can implement some special actions to reach special needs. And during this state of exception, you can create mechanisms for biopolitical mechanisms, but also necropolitics mechanisms, as Giorgio Agamben said. In Brazil, I think we have some problems especially regarding data. There is an NGO called in Rio that are trying to show the number of deaths in slums, because the official data is not showing this. So I think and at the same time we have a a special area arising in Brazil, that is disaster law studies, but they are also discussing the pandemic law studies. So this is important to try to reduce the power of the national government, and also the social movements. I think social movements have an important role to do this. And one of the first things that the new president did was to persecute, I think, the social movements in Brazil.
Thanks, Victoria. I think we have time for just a couple more questions. We're not going to get to everybody who's posted comments, which is a good problem to have, I guess. But if you have any more questions that we don't get to, please keep up the conversation with us, especially over on Twitter at Disasters Decon, over on the podcast account. I want to come to a question from Claudia, or we might finish with that one. I want to come to a question from Michael, who asks whether we think that disaster capitalism is simply an extension of like ongoing or normal capitalism, or in disaster times, is it something else or something extra?
I think there is always a space for keeping things more neoliberal each time. We have seen that after each disaster, I think, and you have to remember that the neoliberal experiment began here in Chile, and most of the politics regarding neoliberalism have been implemented here. Each time, each disaster becomes an opportunity for people or for enterprises, or for some people to have profit, to implement neoliberal new policies. We have seen this after the 2010 earthquake with the reconstruction, with the provision of emergency shelters, with the provision of economical aid for the families. And we have seen that also now. The difference now is that people is becoming aware of that, is becoming aware of inequalities, and because of the social upheaval that occurred in October 2019, we have now the possibility to discuss a new set of norms, a new set of rules, and we are discussing the possibility of a new constitution that we expect, if anything is going well, that we can change maybe the economics, the socio-political system, and also to the reduce inequalities is our dream. I don't know if it's going to happen or not.
Thanks, Claudia. I want to just finish with this question from Claudia Santos on YouTube. And she again is coming back to this idea of neoliberalism and its basis in in exploiting inequalities. And she asks, is it illusory to think of any positive transformation in our countries without a change to our economic system? So anyone have some really brief comments on that? I think it's a good place to finish. Wes, you look like you want to talk. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to say yes. Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, it would be, I don't know what kind of, I don't know how you change it without changing the larger structure, right? I mean, you can mitigate, here we are, disaster field about mitigation. You can mitigate the problems with it, but I mean, the inequality is going to be there because the system of neoliberalism needs inequality to keep running, or else it won't keep running. So, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that was really interesting. Thank you all so much for contributing, and also thank you for all the wonderful questions. Just before I wrap up, I've decided that I'm going to read you a very, very short snippet from Galeano, which I think summarizes everything that we've discussed so nicely. So this is a short snippet from the story that Galeano wrote, and it's called Other Natural Disasters. In 1879, after 3 years without rain, the Indians numbered 9 million fewer. It is the fault of nature. These are natural disasters, say those who know. But in India, during these atrocious years, the market is more punishing than the drought. Under the law of the market, freedom oppresses. Free trade, which obliges you to sell, forbids you to eat. India is not a poor house, but a colonial plantation. The market rules. Wise is the invisible hand which makes and unmakes, and no one should dare correct it. Thank you for indulging me with this. But I think this is everything that we've discussed now, and this topic isn't new. I do hope there will be a day where we won't have to discuss it, but perhaps not in our generation. So thank you, all of you, for contributing to all the effort and for everything that you do. And I'm sure everyone really enjoyed listening to the insights that you've provided today. And for our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been excellent to have all these questions and comments. And please, if you're not following us yet, do follow us on Twitter, Facebook, on Instagram, @DisastersDecon. And we'd love to hear what you think. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us, especially Mitul and Wes. It's really late. You guys need to get to bed.
Yes. Thank you.
Now.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.